Welcome to Purpose Living Coaching
Yeah.
Podcast. Today we have a fantastic topic. I think this is a topic that is really important for as a family, or if you don't have a family, or just single trying to live your life and having structure in your life is really key. And I love this topic: knowing your values and priorities. That's something that we're going to be jumping into and having that conversation around. My name is Panji.
Jen?
So we're gonna jump right into it and just start to have a nice conversation around it. And for me, I'll just kind of give you a small definition of what I think values are and priorities. Values to me are things that basically things that are like your cornerstone. Those are the things that you stand for, the things that you believe in, and the things that will help you continue to make decisions as you go through life. Right? Priorities are those things that keep you in line with those values. So along those lines, let's dive into it. Let's talk about different priorities and different things that we have that keep us in alignment with not just ourselves and the things that we do, but also with God. So jump into it, give us some list, and we can go into it and dive into it.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, so for my life, most of my life, I didn't really think about priorities or values. I just went through the motions and was living life, And so when I actually took the time to ask myself, what really is most important? What are my priorities? What are my values? What do I stand for? I feel like everything started to shift. At first I didn't even realize I was doing it. And then as I started to learn more about setting priorities and values, I'm like, oh, okay, like we can actually live our life according to what is truly in our core and what our heart is leading us to live it. And so I'm going to just kind of give some examples of, okay, so when we're talking about priorities, what are we really talking about here? So that might be your faith, your family, your personal health, your family's health, your personal growth, your personal time, financial growth, your extended family, friends, giving, travel, entertainment, hobbies, upkeep of your home. There can be lots more of priorities, but really setting what is truly most important to you, and being able to list those out and then list them in order. So when you kind of went through this exercise, like for you, what are your top 5 priorities?
My top 5, it has to be number 1 is faith, number 2 family, and then personal health and personal time. Those are a huge one for me. And then friends, of course. So we're just looking at that and looking at those things. Those are things that come first, and then everything else kind of course, you're not just gonna have just 5, but you're gonna have other ones that complement the rest of them to keep you in alignment with everything else, connected with everything else that you're doing in your life. So yeah, I would say definitely faith, family, personal time, personal growth, and definitely friends for sure.
Yeah. And what was cool is I think it's really important to be on the same page, or at least understand everybody that, is in your household, or even close friends, because for him, personal time was a high priority, to just be able to have that space by himself. And for me, I didn't always understand that, and so like I went in all of the time, and, for him, he needed that space for himself, and then he's going to be that much better with us as a family. And I didn't realize that I also needed that personal time. For a long time, I thought I didn't need it until I actually started giving myself that time, and I'm like, oh, this is a really good thing. So I think you kind of evolve and you really understand your priorities more and more as you start to practice it, and you start to write it down and actually take the time to think about it, reflect on it, and make it your own. So we do encourage you to just, grab a notebook, piece of paper, whatever, even notes on your phone, it doesn't matter, but just start off with like 5 to 10 priorities. Like it could be more, but just start off with 5 to 10. And then really just take the time to think about it, and don't try to rush it, or, you might write one down and then you realize that's not really that important to you and you write something else. But, if travel is really important, write that down. If giving is really important, write that down. If being able to stay rooted and grounded in your faith is really important, write that down. And then from there, we encourage you to start to try to list it and really challenge yourself as you're listing it. Like, what is the order of those priorities? So for us, our house is rooted and grounded in faith. And so faith is all of our first top priority. And so then we have that as number one. And then we have to challenge ourselves. Does our calendar and does our time reflect that as a top priority? And if it doesn't, do we feel out of alignment? So same thing if family is a top priority. Does our time and does our calendar reflect that as a top priority? Personal health. What are we doing for our personal health? If that's a priority, is our life reflecting those priorities? So what would you say about like having your priorities, but then allowing your priorities to actually be in alignment with how you're living your day-to-day life?
You gotta ask yourself, what is the most important thing in your life? And I think the question that you gotta ask yourself, that I always ask people is, when it's all said and done, and let's say life happens, and you completely lose everything, right? You completely lose everything. What is that one thing that is gonna be consistent in your life? What is that thing that's gonna be constant? It's not gonna change. It's gonna be the same. For a lot of people, I believe faith will probably be that thing for some people. For some people, it might be something else, right? Because we're all different and we're in a different growth mindset and all those things. So if you find out number one thing by asking yourself that question, then ask yourself, what is the second thing, right? And what is the third thing? And then you over time, you finally realize, okay, these things are the most important things in my life. And if I stay true to these things and I'm in connection with those things, I will stay on path of where I need to be. So that is usually the question that I usually ask myself. If something comes up and I have to make the choice between this and that, that's the first thing I have to ask myself. That's the question I have to ask myself. Well, how high on the ladder this is? And then you make the decision based on how high it is and how important it is and how urgent it is, right? We all heard about the quadrant of being urgent, what is important, right? And making sure that you're making a decision based on those things. Because if you start to make your decision just based off of how you feel on certain things rather than what you truly know about, then that's where you kind of put yourself, you start to branch off of the path that you're supposed to be on. So always asking yourself the question of, okay, how high do I value this thing? And if I make this decision, how is this going to take me off the path that I need to be on? How far off is this going to take me off the path? Mm-hmm. So that's where I usually try to go from and ask myself those questions.
Yeah, and I'd say it kind of goes back to our conversation last week where we were talking about, like, are we saying our best yeses and what should we be saying no to, what should we be saying yes to? When we know our priorities, then we can align our yeses and our nos with those priorities. So you can kind of weigh that, like, is that in alignment with my value system? And if you're doing something in your life that isn't true to your core values, you're gonna feel out of alignment and your peace is gonna be shaken just because you're not in aligned with what your true priorities are, and there's going to be a disconnect there. And so if you find yourself in that disconnect, challenge that, like, do I know my priorities first? Because for a long time I didn't, but do I know them? And then am I living according to them? Because if we're not, we're going to feel kind of out of whack in some ways. I did want to move into even having family priorities and values too. So we have 5 kiddos and we, are trying to train them up in the way that they should go. And sometimes they need a little correction and some extra love and support, right? But so we actually have like 5 little core values that as a family that we kind of run by. Do you want to share those values?
No, you can't.
Okay.
I can't sing it on my head.
See, the kids and I, we got this down. We are what? We are kind, loving, helpful, grateful, and fun. So if we're not being kind, loving, helpful, grateful, and fun, then we might need a timeout. And timeout doesn't mean that, we're bad people. It means we need a minute, and so we have to go to our room or remove ourselves from the situation to get them calm, and then we can come back into the fun space where we are going to live by those things. And if we don't have, or having that guiding of, okay, this is what we want to live by in this home, then the chaos and the craziness of parenting can kind of take away or go all over the place. And so really sitting back, not only for yourself, but also for your core family, or this could even be in the workplace, this could be at church, this could be in a friend group. Like, what is like our values and our priorities in these relationships, so that we can really have impactful and meaningful time together.
I think it comes down to, for you as a parent, is just having control of your home, right? And when I say control, I'm not talking about like you're being like a dictator or something like that. No. But setting a set of expectations, setting standards of how things are going to be in your home, right? By doing so, you don't have to yell at your kids or you smack their butts or something like that. You don't have to do that, because if you have set those expectations for them and they see that you're living in those expectations, they'll automatically follow, right? So when we say be kind, are you being that example for them?
Yeah.
You say loving, yes, I am going to be tough for you. I'm going to say no to certain things at times. But whenever you need that hug, I'm going to be the first person to give you those hugs. What's the third one?
Helpful.
Helpful.
We have to be
right?
helpful.
Being able to clean it around the house, being able to do those things. If your sister needs your help in doing something, you go and, if your sister needs a hug, that's also being helpful. You go give a hug, right? Before, I'm just going to ask you to Grateful. All right. We have, right? This is something that we're trying to do better at. Helping our kids understand that being grateful for what we have, right? Especially when it comes to food. We give them a lot too much options. So now we're trying to help them understand, okay, whatever we have on the table, what's the saying? You guys have it down.
You eat what you eat, or you get what you get and you don't throw a fit.
Yep. You get what you get and you don't throw a fit, right? Because we're being thankful and we're being grateful for what we have in front of us. What's the last one?
We are fun.
Fun. Everybody gets to have fun, right? And as you can see, all those things are connected in a way, right? Because if you go from one thing to the next one, it helps each other and it helps you stay in alignment. And I love it the way the last one is fun, because then if you do all those things, you stay in a good path and everybody else will follow and things will go the way they're supposed to. So really just asking yourself, are you setting some good expectations for your kids? And what are those standards? And are those standards clear for your kids to understand, right? And sometimes it's fun to just listen to one of them just out of the blue. Are you being kind? They say they're talking to their brother or their sister. Are you being kind? That's not kind. I wouldn't say that. So, when you start to see that happen, then you know that, they're finally understanding those things and they know exactly what your core value is as a family and what you stand for. And you don't have to force it on them. They'll literally follow through as you go.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that it starts with us. Like, if we're not leading by that example, then they won't have it to follow.
Yeah.
And so, not that we are ever going to be perfect, but that we are in mission and training to grow up into those things. And so, if we mess it up, to actually go to them and apologize.
Own it up.
Yeah, and just say, you know what? Mommy wasn't super grateful right now. Do you forgive me? And this is how we can do better. And so leading by that example, but knowing what they are, like have those things written down for you first. And then if you're married, come together with your spouse and knowing each other's. And then as a family, what are those priorities? What are those values as a family unit? And then you can spread that across a lot of areas of your life, but you want to make sure that it's true and to your core, like, yep, this is what I want to live by. And then knowing that if we're out of alignment, that there's a correction there. So I will just give a really quick example this morning. I won't call her name out. One of our daughters was kind of throwing a little fit because she wanted a certain snack, and I told her that we're not going to have a snack until the living room is all picked up and cleaned up. And so her response was to sit on the floor and cry and throw a fit. And so then I said, honey, I can't allow you to have that snack because then that would make you think that that is how you get your way. So are we being kind, loving, helpful, grateful, and fun right now? No. Okay. So then we're not going to be able to get what we want here if we're not choosing to be helpful, to be grateful. And, we got to talk it through, and then she understood, and you get a hug and do all the things. But really challenging ourselves if we're living by our core values. If we're being grumbling, complaining, doing all those things, just stop. It doesn't mean we're terrible people. Just stop and challenge ourselves. Okay, am I living by the character, by the values that I want to live by? And then am I doing what I need to do to be intentional to actually live that out?
Yeah, I mean, and it's I would say two things. Having clarity is huge.
Yeah.
Having clarity, and I'm not just saying with your kids, even with your spouse, so
Yeah.
that you both know exactly, like, okay, I want my personal time. Well, what does that mean? I need 2 hours out of the day to go and do something by myself. If not, I'm gonna go crazy. That's what.
We're a lot. We're a big family.
That's what you gotta say, right? I need this much time to go and do this, to be by myself. Okay, this is my workout time. I need that time to be, if you want to go, well, we're lucky enough to have our own gym at home that we do that. If you need that time, hey, can you help take the kids so I can go do that? Like that is what I mean by clarity. And having that. And when it comes down to kids, you just got to be consistent, right? And trust me, it might take you a long time before they finally starting to get and understand what you're saying, because they're still kids. They're still growing. But just understand that the more consistent you keep on doing it, and you keep doing, you keep going, it's gonna get tiring sometimes, it's gonna get frustrating sometimes, but you just think about it in a way that they don't know exactly what you're trying to help them understand. But as they grow and mature, they're gonna understand that. So continue to put those values in there, small, little by little. Catch those teachable moments and make them the teachable moments that they need to be. Right? Don't allow those moments to go by because you're carried away, because you look on your phone or you got to go do something. No, stop, take a minute and sit down with them and have those conversations with them and allow them to understand, okay, this does not go right. And then most importantly, before I forget this one is actually pretty good that we need to talk about. Praise them when they do things that are right.
Yeah.
Right? Don't let those moments just go by and be like, oh, wow, they got it. No. Mention to them, like, hey, that was really nice of you. She's really good at doing that. I'm working at getting better at doing that. Just let them know that was a good gesture that you did to help your sister in that moment. So those are three things that I think that will always stick in my head to try to do better at and become better at doing.
Yeah, and I think that's good. And honestly, when I kind of came up with those kind, loving, helpful, grateful, and fun thing, I was actually in a moment of complete weakness where all the kids were throwing a fit, and I was just like going crazy myself a little bit. And I'm like, all right, something has to change. Like, me getting worked up when they're worked up is not helping anybody. And so I had to take a moment and like get alone and be quiet and pray. And that's when it was like, okay, we need some kind of standard to live by, because us, like, they get worked up, we get worked up, and nobody's benefiting anything. And so I'm just going to be real, because we are training ourselves and getting better and better at this as we go. But like, it was in that weak state that it was like, okay, what can we do? How can we set some priorities, some values as a family to know what we're living by, so that we can continue just to have a standard and an expectation, so that they know it and we know it, and then we can encourage them to continue to grow in it.
Yeah. So for you, you said it was like a moment. In that moment, how do you find patience to say, okay, what take us through that moment to be able to say, okay, I need to stop and realize what is happening, and then not focus on my emotions, but look at the other side that is causing me to feel this way, to make that, and then make that decision, right? Make that choice to say, okay, I need to attack this from where it's happening, not from where it's going.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is the key right there, is when either party are in their emotional state is not the time to have the conversation. It's the time to step away and regain our composure. Anytime we're in emotions, nobody is thinking in the logical part of our brain at all. And so we need to, take a pause. And that's where the timeout is powerful. So they get a timeout in their room, I get a timeout in my room, and then you can kind of take some deep breaths. For me, I go to the Lord in prayer, and really challenge myself, like, okay, look what's happening here. What is true about what's going on here, like asking the Lord for wisdom upon it. Who am I? I'm a mom who desires to train up their children the way that they should go, and I desire to follow God and his path on how I can respond to them. And then I make my decision on, okay, what's going to be the most impactful and fruitful way to be able to respond here. And if I'm in my emotions, it's not the time to do anything. It's really stopping, gaining that composure, being in that space, and then being able to come together and talk. So after a time of discipline and a conversation, there should always be a uniting and a hug, because then they're getting it, and like, okay, this is why we had to discipline you. Do you understand? We love you. We see like you are we always say you're a beautiful, wonderful child of God. And speaking that life into them, they're not their mistake. They made a mistake. Or I'm not my mistake. I made a mistake. Asking for forgiveness, coming together, but doing it when we're in a calm state and not heightened. If we have any anger, tension, like we want to like cry, whatever, all the things, take a pause and come back when you're in a calm state.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And hey, sometimes there's nothing wrong with your kids seeing you emotional either, because then you can explain that to them. And that's a whole nother topic that we can talk about. But also, and this is another podcast that we can do on this one, is I've heard this thing. I have people say this, like parents don't even know their kids anymore, because of so many distractions that we have. But one thing that I try to be intentional about doing is paying attention with how my kids behave, how they respond to certain things, right? So that when it is time for me to have this conversation for them to understand what our standards are and what our expectations are as parents, I can speak their language, right? I have one of our daughters, like, I can do whatever I can, like, I could stand up and be like, hey, you do this. She will look at me like, I'm not scared. What are you doing? Compared to my other two, I do the same thing, and they're like cringing on the side, right? But the other one, if I send her up to her room, everything falls apart. Everything falls apart. So, like I said, this is going to be a whole nother podcast that we can talk about knowing and understanding your kids and learning how to talk to them in a way that they understand what those standards and what those expectations are for you as a family.
Yeah, so as a recap, really just taking some time this week and look at what are your values, what are your priorities, list them out, put them in order, have them written down at a place where you can actually go to it and see it. Get out your calendar. Does my calendar reflect my priorities? So if faith is very important to you, where are you being intentional with that growth? If physical health is really important to you, where are you being intentional with taking care of your physical body? If your marriage is really important to you, where are you putting that time in to really be with your spouse? If being able to travel is really important to you, where are you putting that into your calendar? So really look at what are your priorities, Does your calendar reflect it? Are you living with purpose? Do you have your intentions set? And then how are you going to actually follow through? Because when you're in alignment with your core values, everything else will kind of flow from that.
Like they say, if you want to know what is super important to you, look in your checkbook or look at your bank account statement. For some people, look at your credit card statement. If you look, you'll find what is important to you. Just saying.
Yep, those all reflect too. So we are thankful that you have joined us. Go ahead and like, subscribe, share. We really want to be able to impact people.
Ooh, I got one thing.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so if you're trying to find a podcast, I just caught this today. It is on Spotify. It is purposeliving.coach. Purposeliving.coach, because I could not secure Purpose Living coaching. So it's purposeliving.coach on the podcast. You can find us everywhere.
Perfect. Well, thank you for listening to Purpose Living Podcast, where we are training to do life God's way. That's right.